You can't fix what you do not know. Zachman makes sure that you know. Welcome to the Enterprise Architecture Radio, and we are running a series of comparison between various enterprise architecture frameworks. In the first part of the series, we did a foundation in which we talked about all the different frameworks, and I talked about a very high level what each framework is. In the second series, we talked about the TOGAF framework, and we did a slightly deeper dive of what the TOGAF framework is, its content framework, architecture development method, capability framework, etc. Today, we are going to do a slightly deeper dive into Zachman Framework, and I will talk about what Zachman Framework is and where it's useful. And this is episode 117. But before we get started with the Zachman Framework, I'd like to remind you that if you're enjoying the videos that I'm publishing and this new format of shorter, deeper dive, videos multiple times a week, then do let me know. And like, share, and subscribe, and comment, and also talk about what kind of content you'd like to hear in the future. And I'll see what I can do. All right, on to Zachman Framework then. Now, like I said, John Zachman, great man. I've actually done the Zachman Framework certification, and the way that you can do, or the way that you could do Zachman certification back in the day, was that John Zachman would himself come and deliver the training, and you have to take the training from him, and then he takes your test, and then you have to submit a project, and that's how you do Zachman Framework. I am not entirely sure if that method has changed now. If it has, then somebody please let me know. All right, so amazing man. It's just amazing just to be in his presence. He has an aura. Very, very fascinating experience. So he's called the father of enterprise architecture, and he created the term called Zachman Framework. And if you really think about it, the Zachman Framework is very simple. It's like the game of Texas Hold'em poker. Takes very easy to learn, takes a lifetime to master. It's like that. So the Zachman Framework is basically a collection of information about the organization, but from various perspectives, right? It's a 6x6 matrix. In the columns, you have what, how, where, who, when, and why. And then in your rows, you have your executive perspective, your business management perspective, your architect's perspective, your engineer's perspective, your technician's perspective, and your enterprise architecture perspective. So enterprise perspective. So what you do is you collect information from all these perspectives combined. For example, you collect the what. A what, for example, would be business definitions. Now, you don't just collect what, you collect it from various perspectives. Again, you take the rows. So what from the executive perspective? What is the definition of something from the executive perspective? Or what is it that you're trying to do from the executive perspective? From the business management point of view, from the architect's point of view, from the engineer's point of view, and so on. And then you go to how. How are you going to execute this? How from the executive point of view, how from the business management point of view, how from the architect's point of view, and so on and so forth. And then you go to where, and so on and so forth. So this is essentially your Zachman framework. But it's not just isolated pieces of information. You have to understand that as well, right? These are all connected information. And John Zachman says that Zachman framework is not it doesn't work with composites, all right? I mean, it's an ontology of the core building blocks, right? And this is unique about Zachman framework. It's a taxonomy. And in TOGAF point of view, or in TOGAF terminology, you would call it a content framework because it helps you collect all the information about the organization, right? In fact, there are many people who use the TOGAF framework for everything else and Zachman framework for the content framework. So you can, and this is what is recommended, that TOGAF says that, you have to customize the TOGAF framework according to your organization specific needs. So what people do is they take the TOGAF framework in which they use the architecture development method and your capability framework and all of that as is. But for the content framework, instead of using the TOGAF content framework, they use the Zachman content framework, but because it's a lot more matured and structured and everything. So Zachman framework, columns, rows, information collection, but connected. Your information of what is connected to the how and the when and the where and the why and so on, right? So it's like beads on a thread. You take one end of the thread and you start pulling, and all the beads start coming up. All the beads that are connected to the first beginning of the thread get pulled out. So you will know exactly how everything is connected. So that is the Zachman framework. Obviously, this is still not a completely deep dive. And again, I am not going to cover all the different artifacts that are there within the Zachman framework, because for that you will need a proper systematic training. But at a high level, Zachman framework is a content framework that collects information. Now, there are various other aspects to it. Like, for example, how do you run workshops? Where if you implement Zachman framework within your organization. Like, for example, there's something called a Zachman audit, where you need to gather all the information that you have and check whether the information is appropriate and according to the real world situation or not. Because what is enterprise architecture? Enterprise architecture, if you think about it, is a virtual world that you are creating that represents the real world, right? You have an organization. You have 5 business functions in the real world. You have 5 business functions documented within your enterprise architecture. You've got 20 processes for the first business function, 18 for the second, and so on and so forth. You've got 20 business processes, 18, and so on and so forth in the enterprise architecture that you're documenting, right? It should ideally represent exactly how the real world is. Now, it's always going to be a catch-up, right? Because the real world is changing regularly, and your enterprise architecture needs to catch up to it, right? It needs to ensure that it reflects the real world properly. Not only that, it also drives the change many times, right? You sometimes, you look at the design of the organization and think that this is not right. It's not how it's supposed to be. It could be more efficient. And then that drives the change in the organization. And once that happens, once you achieve your target architecture, that target architecture needs to be documented into the enterprise architecture repository. So, there's a little bit of a catch-up done. So the Zachman audit is essentially ensuring that we are documenting the architecture according to how it is in the real world. So we collect all this information and we check through it. So there are many such, workshops and processes that you need to conduct when you are implementing enterprise architecture using the Zachman framework. Once again, it's a content framework, which means it's a checklist of all the information that you can gather to do your enterprise architecture. It's matured, it's structured, and it gives you many different perspectives about the organization. So that's a wrap for me today. I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and I hope you are enjoying this new format of shorter videos multiple times in a week. If you are, let me know. And let YouTube know. Like, share, and subscribe, and comment. Talk to me about what you would like to hear in the upcoming episodes. Once again, Enterprise Architecture Radio is not just a podcast. It's a collaboration platform, and I need your help to build it. Talk to each other, guide each other, help each other out, learn from each other, but most importantly, have a ton of fun.